Welcome to another episode of the Antifragility Reframe podcast, where struggles become strength and stress fuels growth. My guest today is Dr. Sheldon Greaves, and he is the author of the Guerrilla Scholar's Handbook. And we are going to have an interesting session, I think, as we learn how a guerrilla scholar can help one not only reframe, but become anti-fragile. Dr. Greaves, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Frank. It's a pleasure to be here.
As we chatted in our pre-interview discussion, I was really very curious as to, what was the event that launched you into what is an unusual academic approach?
Well, there were a couple of things. At the time, while I was working, I began working on a doctorate in ancient Near Eastern studies at Berkeley. And at the same time, my spouse was also working on a doctorate in classics at Stanford. So we were a young married couple effectively putting two kids through college, namely each other. And we came to an arrangement, which was that I would work for a year and she would go to school. And then the next year she would work and I would go to school. So I was taking these financial leaves every other year, which slowed things down, of course. But um, the spoiler alert, we did both finish, which was nice. But when I wasn't enrolled, I didn't have access to the usual tools of a university. I didn't have library access. Access to my professors was a lot less uh, convenient. So I had to get creative as far as keeping up in my field when I wasn't in school and to keep all my skills sharp. So that was one problem. The second problem was that after I graduated, the path that I had envisioned for myself kind of dried up. There just weren't any jobs at all in the humanities, let alone the study of the ancient Near East, which would be basically what we call the Middle East today, but um, everything from the late Stone Age up to the rise of Islam. So there was that. Now, the the third difficulty, if you want to call it that, we have to go back to around 1990, 91. We were living in a townhouse. We were sharing a townhouse with a friend of ours on a street that bordered between Menlo Park, California, and East Palo Alto, which was a very troubled neighborhood. It was very crime ridden. It was a really bad scene. And one dark night, I uh, well, long story short, I got mugged
Hmm.
when I went in to get some fish and chips, and I was relieved of my money and a lot of my complacency about this education that I had. Apparently, there were some gaps in it, like how to, avoid getting my butt kicked. So I went looking for a way to remedy that after I graduated, and I ran across this school that was located in San Jose. They were operating out of some warehouse space, and they trained high-end um, executive protection specialists, basically bodyguards. And they were teaching this martial art, which was kind of new at the time. It was called Muay Thai. I'd never heard of it. And so I thought, okay, their pitch was you could go to the YMCA and learn it as a sport, or you could come here and learn it as a job skill.
Hmm.
And I thought, okay, that's a good argument. I'm in. So after about a year of this, the teacher is working patiently to try to put this middle-aged, desk-bound academic wimp in touch with his inner badass, you know. And after about a year or so, we're taking a break, and um, I let slip that I have an advanced degree from Berkeley. And he perks up and he says, "Can I see you in my office for a minute?" And I'm thinking, good heavens, what have I done? You know,
This
so we
would
go,
be called to the principal's office.
yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. So he gets in there and we sit down and he says, "Now, this little school that I have here, I've been doing it for a few years. What I do is I have these certificates that I give to the people who've been through the program. They're registered with the state, but I have bigger plans for this. I would like to take this little school and turn it into a full-fledged university with bachelor's and master's and doctoral programs. But he says, I need people with advanced degrees to help me do that." He says, I'm from India. I have a bachelor's degree in business from a college in India that no one's ever heard of. I don't really have the necessary wherewithal to do this. So um, you told me that you are a technical writer, which is what I was doing at the time. He says, I need people who can document things, who can put together programs and whatnot. And he says, and you also know something about the Middle East. And I said, yeah, well, the ancient stuff, but I can find it on a map. And that's when he leaned across the table, looked me in the eye, and said, "How would you like to co-found a university with me?" Now, I was floored at this prospect, but I think I was also prepared for it because in pursuing my scholarship in unusual and unconventional ways, it was clear to me that there were lots of different ways of undertaking higher education. And I had
So
also,
the experience actually prepared you to look
mhm,
at things differently, prepared you to take a different perspective.
exactly. Now, I have to say too that I told Nirmalia, my teacher, I says, "Look, this sounds really interesting, but you have to understand my knowledge of the intelligence world is basically grounded in the fact that I've seen every episode of Get Smart. You know, this isn't what I went to school for." And he said, "Well, first of all, one of the reasons why I want to do this is because there aren't any schools that do this the way I'd like to do it." But he says, "But more important, you've been doing this for a year. You keep showing up, you train hard, you pay attention, you do what I ask you to do, and um, work on your own." He says, "Based on that, I think you can do this," which I found to be very interesting, that he placed such a premium on passion
Mhm.
and just the willingness to give it a shot. And I said, "Okay, I'm in all the way." And long story short, we did eventually found what became Henley Putnam University. That was the first university to offer fully accredited degree programs in intelligence, counterterrorism, and executive protection. And that was kind of a long leap from reading ancient parchments and clay tablets, you know, to suddenly talking about spycraft and working with people from any number of alphabet soup agencies. But that I think is a good example of the idea of guerrilla scholarship, where you're willing to cross boundaries, where you're willing to consider other ways of learning and researching and expressing what it is you've learned. And
So tell us a bit about guerrilla scholarship.
guerrilla scholarship is what I like to call the practice of doing creative research and thinking and even publishing if when you don't have access to the tools of a regular university. And part of that, I think, is grounded in the fact that, quite frankly, most of the really interesting thinking that's going on today is happening outside the university.
As you said that, I was thinking AI, AI.
Yeah, AI is one huge example. And there are also a number of other people that most people could um, would recognize, like Neil deGrasse Tyson
Mhm.
or I'm sorry, who's the guy who did the Black Swan? Um,
Taleb,
Saleb, yes,
Nassim,
and
Nassim Taleb.
that's the one, yes,
Yeah.
and any number of other people. They're not at universities. They don't have university positions. But they're the ones who are doing all this interesting stuff that's really kind of driving the larger conversation. And there are a lot of people who have done this in the past. I'm thinking, for instance, of Buckminster Fuller,
Mhm.
who never actually completed his university degree. There was Barbara Tuchman, the historian, who wrote on everything under the sun, did it very well. But if she had been an academic, there's no way that she would have been allowed to go over such a wide range of things. They would have said, pick the
Focus.
14th
Yeah.
century or this and stay in that lane. That was another thing that bothered me about academia was that we had to stay in our lane, and I just don't like that.
As we are about to close,
Uh-huh.
how does this help one to become anti-fragile?
It helps you uh, by always giving you a third option, or at least the ability to detect that third option. And it also gives you a larger viewpoint where you can say, okay, we have this, but we can do better. And when you do guerrilla scholarship, you have to get used to setbacks
Mhm.
because they will happen.
Mhm.
And you have to get used to things taking longer than you'd like them to take.
Mhm.
And that kind of patience and that kind of tenacity, I think, gives you the ability to push beyond just getting back to where you were.
Mhm.
That momentum can carry you forward into something bigger and brighter and more interesting and alive.
And does that help you to connect with others in the community or in?
Absolutely. In fact, in my book, I place a very strong emphasis on community. Uh, learning is a social activity.
Mhm.
That's where it usually happens and where it's at its best. And so there have been a lot of books written in the past on independent scholarship, and I do talk about independent scholarship, but I think we need to move beyond that. We need to be thinking about communities because you have more ideas when you have a community, and you have more resilience when you have a community, and you have more resources and a greater collective desire to make something better.
Dr. Graves, thank you. I'm going to close by just mentioning the five elements that I use to describe anti-fragility reframing,
Hmm.
because you've touched on all of them. One is, not surprising, shifting perspective.
Hmm.
The second one is expanding access to ideas, to people, to thoughts. The third one is collaborating, innovating together. Fourth one, and that's the community side of it. Fourth one is multiplying benefit.
Hmm.
And the fifth one is having a growth outcome mindset. And those are elements, I think, if one approaches problems with those things in mind, helps us to be anti-fragile.